How does a toaster work?
Inside a toaster are thick wires arranged in panels that heat up and toast your food. When you push down the lever that lowers your bread, it catches on a hook inside, turning on the heater, while your bread turns brown and crispy. A special metal switch inside the toaster gets hot, too, and bends. After a certain amount of time it bends so much that it pushes on a bar that releases the lever from the hook, and the toasting stops. This action also releases a spring, which pushes the lever up again and your toast pops up. All metals expand when they are heated.
Why is the Statue of Liberty such an important symbol of the United States?
The Statue of Liberty stands for many of the nation's most cherished ideals: freedom, equality, and democracy. Perhaps most important to the millions of immigrants for whom the statue was one of their first sights of the United States is the ideal of opportunity, the chance to begin a new life, in a new land. While their lives in the United States were frequently difficult, for millions of immigrants, America offered the chance to escape from grinding poverty and abusive governments in other lands. Standing in the midst of New York Harbor, the point of entry into the United States for so many immigrants arriving on ships from other countries, the Statue of Liberty has been a powerful symbol of opportunity for more than 100 years. A poem called The New Colossus, written by Emma Lazarus, was mounted on the statue's pedestal in the early 1900s. Its famous lines include these words that Lazarus imagined Lady Liberty to be saying: "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed to me, I lift my lamp beside the golden door."
What are eating disorders?
Eating disorders are psychological, or mental ailments that involve an obsession with food and with being thin. Eating disorders strike about 1% of teenagers in the United States. And girls are affected far more often than boys. People with eating disorders frequently feel depressed and anxious, and they often have a low opinion of themselves. They develop an obsession with food and sometimes devote many hours a day to an intense exercise routine. They frequently withdraw from friends and family, finding excuses to avoid social situations, particularly those that involve food. The two most common eating disorders are anorexia and bulimia. People suffering from anorexia avoid eating whenever possible. What little food they do eat causes anxiety and fear that it will make them fat. Anorexic people usually lose weight rapidly. but even after they've become alarmingly skinny they still look in the mirror and see themselves as overweight. Anorexia can cause a severe drop in energy and ability to concentrate. It can also result in damage to internal organs, loss of hair, and weakening of bones. If it goes untreated, anorexia can become quite serious and even deadly. Bulimia is characterized by behavior known as binge and purge. People suffering from this disorder eat large quantities of food, but as soon as they've finished eating they make themselves throw up or take laxatives, which stimulates the colon to produce a bowel movement. Bulimia can cause damage to the kidneys and stomach. And the frequent vomiting sometimes causes the person's tooth enamel to decay. People with anorexia often appear dramatically thinner. But bulimia can be harder to recognize as a bulimic person does not actually lose much weight. Doctors aren't exactly sure what causes eating disorders. Some believe they are a result of the tremendous pressure society places on young girls to be thin models. In magazines and celebrities on television reinforce the idea that being beautiful equals being thin. Some research has suggested that eating disorders may be the result of a chemical imbalance in the brain, and that the tendency to develop such a disorder can run in families. Regardless of the cause, it's vitally important that people with eating disorders seek treatment. Eating disorders can be very serious, and the longer they go on, the harder it becomes to treat them.
What is the moon?
The planets of our solar system orbit the Sun, held in their paths by the Sun's gravitational force. Other heavenly bodies in our solar system called natural satellites or moons orbit the planets in a similar way. Some planets have many moons, Saturn has 18, but Earth has just one. Our moon is an almost round natural satellite that consists of layers of different rock, similar in structure to Earth. It is believed that both were created at the same time, when our solar system was formed. Some scientists think that the moon broke off from Earth after our planet collided with another. Unlike Earth, however, the moon has no water or atmosphere, so nothing can live or grow on it. Without an atmosphere, nights, where the moon is turned away from the sun, are fiercely cold, and days, where the moon receives the sun's full rays, are very hot. The moon is located about 240,000 miles, 386,400 kilometers from Earth, close enough for astronauts to make a visit. The moon's diameter is about 2,160 miles, 3,478 kilometers. Roughly 1/4 that of Earth, and Earth has about 80 times more mass or weight. The moon does not shine on its own, the moonlight that we see is simply sunlight reflected off its surface.
How can animals live in a desert?
The harsh conditions of desert life present many problems for the animals living there. Temperatures get extremely high. Water is scarce, and food supplies, whether in the form of plants or other animals, dwindle. Desert animals have developed numerous techniques, however, to adapt to their unique climate. Just as animals living in cold climates hibernate in winter, so do some desert animals live through dry periods by becoming dormant, or inactive. Desert toads bury themselves deep in the ground, emerging only after a rainfall to get water and food and to breed. Many desert animals live in underground burrows or in caves. Such animals spend hot, dry days in their dens, away from the sun, coming out in the early morning or at night when it's cooler. Several desert animals are especially equipped to handle hotter temperatures. The large ears of jackrabbits can release heat while they rest in the shade. Owls and some other birds release body heat through their open mouths, letting their saliva evaporate to cool down their bodies. Many desert residents have pale fur, feathers, scales, or skin. An adaptation that means they absorb less of the sun's heat. They also blend in better with their sandy surroundings, which means they are less visible to predators. The meat eaters in the desert can sometimes get all of the moisture they need from eating their prey. Or, in the case of vultures, from eating carrion, or the flesh of already dead animals. Other desert animals are able to conserve the moisture they do get in amazing ways. The kangaroo rat, for example, can actually create water from the dry seeds it eats. And its kidneys can remove most of the water from its urine, sending the water back through the rat's bloodstream. Thanks to their ability to fly. Birds probably have the easiest time escaping the desert's difficult conditions. They can fly great distances if necessary to find areas where rain has fallen and vegetation is growing. Large winged birds can spend the hottest part of the day soaring way up high where the winds are cooler.
What are plants?
Plants and animals make up almost all of the living things in the world. They are alike in a lot of ways. Both are made up of cells. Tiny building blocks of life that produce chemicals that control growth and activity. Often these cells become specialized in a plant or animal, with different types doing particular jobs. In addition, both plants and animals use gases, water, and minerals to carry on life processes. Both experience life cycles in which they are created, grow, reproduce, and die. But plants are very different from animals in one big way: most don't move around. Because they are rooted to one spot, plants are able to perform a special process called photosynthesis. For this remarkable process, plants use energy from sunlight, a gas in the air called carbon dioxide, and water and minerals from soil to produce their own food. Animals can't do this; they must look for food, eating plants or other animals in order to get the energy they need to live. The waste product produced by photosynthesis is oxygen, the gas that all animals need to breathe. So without plant life, there would be no animal life on Earth. And without plants around to absorb carbon dioxide, an excess amount of this gas would linger in our atmosphere, trapping the sun's heat and causing an unwanted increase in the planet's average temperatures. Plants, then, are essential not only because they provide so much of the food we eat, and provide nourishment for many of the animals we eat, but because they make our air healthier, using up carbon dioxide and releasing oxygen. In addition, we depend on plants to provide us with other things we need, like wood for building, fibers for making clothes, and medicines to improve our health.
What makes holes in Swiss cheese?
Enzymes, complex proteins, special bacteria, and molds are added to milk to make cheese. These different additives give cheeses their distinctive looks and tastes. The bacteria that are used to make Swiss cheese remain active for an especially long time. These bacteria turn milk sugars into gas long after the cheese has developed its firm outer covering or rind. Because the gas can't escape at that point, it gathers in pockets as the cheese continues to ripen inside, creating bubbles, which look like holes when the cheese is sliced.
Why are elephants hunted for their tusks?
Elephants' tusks, the huge, elongated pair of upper teeth that they use for digging and fighting, are the source of ivory, a hard, creamy white material that has long been carved and polished to create beautiful objects. There are two types of ivory: live ivory, which is taken from a recently killed animal, and dead ivory, from an animal long dead, which is usually found on or buried in the ground. Dead ivory is harder and more brittle, cracking easily. Live ivory is more moist and easier to work with. The quest for live ivory has led to hundreds of thousands of elephants being killed for their tusks. Once very widespread, the world's elephant population has dwindled alarmingly because of this slaughter. But these great animals are now protected in many areas by strict laws that punish elephant hunters. Unfortunately, even the threat of punishment is not enough to stop some poachers or hunters who illegally kill protected animals. In spite of an international ban on the sale of elephant ivory, hundreds of elephants are killed each year by people wanting to sell the ivory.
Are there people in the world who don't wear any clothes at all?
Yes, believe it or not, there are people in the world who don't wear any clothing at all. Tribes of primitive people still exist in places like the Pacific Island of New Guinea and especially in the Amazon region of South America. Some of these tribes' members have never met modern men. and women and know nothing about the industrial world. These native, or indigenous, people live much like people did in prehistoric times, eating what grows naturally in their jungle homes and hunting with bows and arrows. In the warm, humid climates in which they live, they have no need for protective clothing, and in some cases don't have the skills or tools to make cloth. Because of their lack of contact with people from other places, they are not familiar with the idea of modesty or the practice of covering the body with clothes, which is a behavior that most people learn quickly when they are growing up. Being naked is as natural to these primitive peoples as wearing clothing is to us. In our modern world, there are also people known as nudists who enjoy not wearing clothes because it gives them a feeling of freedom. While these men and women wear clothing most of the time as they go about their regular lives, they sometimes get together in special, isolated places with others who enjoy the practice, too.
How is sonar different from radar?
Sonar, short for sound navigation ranging, and radar, radio detection and ranging, work in much the same way to locate distant objects. In both cases, invisible waves are sent out and reflected back once they hit something solid. The time it takes for the waves to return to their point of origin tells how far away an object is located. Radar uses a certain type of light wave known as a radio wave to locate objects. Like all light waves, radar travels in a straight line and at a constant speed. At 186,000 miles, 299,274 kilometers per second, which is the speed of light. Sonar uses sound waves to locate objects. These waves, too, travel in a straight line, but at varying speeds, depending on what they are traveling through. Sound is caused by the vibration of an object, which in turn vibrates surrounding molecules that make sound waves in a kind of chain reaction. Sonar detection is mainly used underwater, where light waves do not travel well. In water, sound waves move about 4 times faster than they do through air because water is denser and has more molecules that can vibrate. But even at 4,600 feet, 1,400 meters, per second, sound waves travel much more slowly than light waves. They also can't be used in outer space, which is airless and has essentially no molecules at all.
How long will I live?
Because medical science has eliminated or brought under control many of the diseases that once kept people from reaching old age, it is likely that you will live a very long time. Today, the average life expectancy of a man living in the United States is around 74 years. The average American woman will reach the age of 80. Just 100 years ago, the average lifespan was more than 25 years shorter. And because medical science continues to improve healthcare and is studying old age and trying to find ways to slow it, people are expected to live even longer. Many factors contribute to a long life. Usually people live longer in Western Europe and North America, and in Japan, than in Latin America, Asia, or Africa. Average lifespans are longer in wealthier, developed, politically stable countries where safe and hygienic housing, healthy diets, and good medical care are common. Another important factor that determines long life is the genetic information you inherit from your parents, which give you certain physical and health characteristics. If your great-grandparents and grandparents reached old age, for instance, you have a good chance of reaching it yourself. But even if they didn't, don't be concerned. You can overcome a lot of inherited traits simply by following a healthy lifestyle. Eating a good diet, getting regular medical care, and keeping physically active all contribute to a longer life.
Can an airplane fly through a cloud?
Most of the time, an airplane can fly easily through a cloud, because the water droplets that form it are too small to affect the aircraft's flight in any way. Flying through a cloud is similar to driving through fog. In fact, fog is really a very low cloud, because his or her vision is obscured. A pilot must rely on navigational equipment to fly through a heavy cloud. Pilots usually try to avoid flying through storm clouds altogether. They often fly above them, because the air currents, rain, hail, or lightning associated with storm clouds can cause bumpy and sometimes dangerous rides.
What do AM and PM mean?
The abbreviation AM stands for the Latin phrase ante meridiem, which means before noon. PM stands for post meridiem, which means afternoon. Meridian, the English spelling, which used to mean midday, refers to an imaginary line that would appear if you could draw a line from the North Pole to the South Pole. The terms came into use in ancient Rome, when the movements of the sun were used to measure time. At 3 points during the day: when the sun rose, when the sun set, and when the sun was directly overhead at midday. It was easy enough for the Romans to determine the time. So they divided the period of daylight into two parts: the period of time before midday, AM, and the period of time after, PM.
So why does a light bulb eventually burn out, then?
A light bulb doesn't really burn out. But during each intense heating, some of the tungsten in the filament vaporizes, breaking off into tiny particles that float in the argon. This process causes the filament to weaken in spots and eventually to break. The discoloration that you see on the inside surface of a worn-out light bulb is not caused by burn marks, but by a thin coating of evaporated tungsten.
What plant has the biggest leaves?
Two species of palm trees have the largest leaves in the world. The raffia palm that grows in the Mascarene Islands in the Indian Ocean and the Amazonian bamboo palm of South America both have leaf blades. Leaves with supporting stems, that measure up to 65 feet, 6 inches, about 20 meters, long.
Why do some plants die in winter, while others don't?
Plants that grow in temperate zones, where there are changes of seasons, have to be able to go dormant or rest when conditions like short days and cold temperatures become unfavorable for growth. Many trees and shrubs do this by shedding their leaves in the fall, halting photosynthesis and reducing moisture loss. A great number of flowering plants, known as herbaceous perennials, die down to ground level, sheltering new buds in the ground until spring arrives. Autumn, with its shorter days and cool nights, begins a survival process in plants called hardening off. Lacking conditions for new growth then, a plant uses its energy to build up more food in its cells. This buildup, in turn, pushes water out into surrounding spaces, where it will do little damage when it freezes. Plants without this ability to harden their tissues die once freezing temperatures arrive. We call plants that die in winter leaving only their seeds to grow again in spring tender plants, or annuals, because they complete their life cycles within a year. Hardy plants, or perennials, are capable of surviving many winter seasons, continuing to grow year after year.
How do waterfalls form?
Over time, a river flows across rocks and carves out a riverbed as it descends from its highland source. If some of these rocks are soft and quickly erode, or wear away, the river valley may slope steeply, causing the river to rush wildly downhill in rapids or even a waterfall.
What do farmers do in the winter?
Some farmers are lucky enough to live in places where the winters are mild and crops can be grown throughout the year. But many farmers live in regions where the winters are cold and snowy, during which time crops can't be grown. In such places, farmers usually plant crops in the spring. Tend to them all summer long, and harvest them in the fall. The winter gives farmers the opportunity to do some things they may not have had time for during the busy growing and harvesting seasons. They can work on their barns or homes, repair their tractors and other machinery, and work out a plan for the following year's crops. Some farmers spend time in the winter promoting and publicizing the products they grow and sell. Many farmers find a second job off the farm during the winter to bring in some extra money. For farmers with lots of animals, or livestock, the work continues right through the winter. The animals must be fed and their pens must be cleaned. Eggs must be gathered from chicken coops and dairy cows need to be milked several times a day. Field work may be suspended for a few months during the winter, but livestock farmers keep busy year-round.
What is the highest place on earth?
The highest place on the surface of Earth is the top of Mt. Everest, in the central Himalayas. A mountain system located on the border between Nepal and Tibet in southern Asia. Everest rises to 29,028 feet, 8,848 meters, above sea level. On May 28, 1953, New Zealander Sir Edmund Hillary and Nepal native Tenzing Norgay were the first people to successfully make the trip to the top of Everest. Since then many mountain climbers have tried to reach the peak, few have succeeded.
What causes hiccups?
Hiccups are probably caused by eating or drinking too quickly or too much, which leads to irritation of the diaphragm. The large sheet of muscles attached to your lower ribs that separates your chest from your abdomen. The stomach rests just below the diaphragm, which is the main muscle used during breathing. When you have hiccups, the diaphragm contracts more strongly than usual, jerking and forcing you to take sudden noisy breaths. The sudden rush of air forces the flap at the top of your windpipe, called the epiglottis, to shut quickly, resulting in the heek sound. People have all sorts of crazy remedies for curing hiccups, like startling a person or eating certain foods, like peanut butter, but they usually go away by themselves after a few minutes. Some rare cases, however, do last for weeks, months, or even years.
Why do people sometimes smell bad after they sweat?
You may be surprised to learn that it's not the sweat itself that smells bad. Sweat is mostly water and salt with small concentrations of various waste products. The odor comes from the bacteria living on your skin. When those bacteria begin working to break down your sweat, they produce an unpleasant odor. Fortunately, the smelly results can be washed away with soap and water in the shower or bath. There are actually two different kinds of sweat glands, eccrine glands and apocrine glands. Eccrine glands are found all over your body, while apocrine glands are concentrated mostly in your armpits and groin area. Apocrine glands get especially active when you hit puberty, thanks to the extra hormones released in your body during that time. And, as an added bonus, apocrine glands produce a different kind of sweat, with proteins and fatty acids, that has a particularly foul smell referred to as body odor when it combines with the bacteria on your skin. Kids who haven't reached puberty yet can sweat a lot without getting too stinky. Much of their sweat is coming from the eccrine glands, rather than the more potent apocrine glands, which don't really develop until puberty. The high concentration of apocrine glands in the armpits explains why people put deodorant or antiperspirant there and not elsewhere. By the way, deodorant doesn't stop you from sweating, but it neutralizes the bacteria that make sweat smell. Antiperspirant actually blocks pores in your skin, preventing you from sweating. While many people prefer antiperspirants, wishing to control the wetness as well as the odor of sweat, some experts believe it's better to let the sweat, which carries some waste products out of your body, leave naturally instead of being blocked.
How much food does an elephant eat each day?
As the largest land animal, the elephant needs a lot of food to keep it going. An elephant eats all day long, browsing or grazing on vegetation like grasses, leaves, and fruit. It can consume hundreds of pounds of food each day, when available, and drink up to 50 gallons, 190 liters, of water. Elephants usually live in large herds, making it necessary to continuously travel over a large region. They are such big animals and big eaters. If they didn't keep moving, they could easily strip an area of vegetation.
How do insects make other sounds?
Most of the time, insects make noise for mating purposes. Male insects produce sound to attract females, sometimes over long distances. A male insect can make such sounds by rubbing parts of his body together. The grasshopper, for instance, rubs the rough edge of his hind leg against the edge of a forewing. Similarly, the cricket scrapes his forewings together. Other insects have membranes that vibrate, which also produces sound.
Why is some hair curly and other hair straight?
Hair grows from tiny holes in the skin called follicles. Follicles can have different shapes and sizes. Hair type is determined by the shape and size of the follicles from which they grow. Large follicles mean you'll have thick hair, while narrow follicles result in fine hair. Straight hair comes from round follicles, wavy hair from those that are oval. And curly hair grows from follicles that look like flattened ovals.
Why can't I taste anything when I have a cold?
Even though your mouth has thousands of taste buds, most of them located on your tongue. The way food smells greatly affects your sense of taste. Your tongue can only sense 4 flavors: sweet, salty, sour, and bitter. It is the different smells of foods that allow you to experience a wide variety of tastes. When you have a head cold, the lining of your nose is swollen and produces extra, thick mucus. This mucus keeps the scent particles of food from getting to your olfactory center, located on top of your nasal cavity. These scent particles cannot reach the thick batch of hairs there that sends smell impulses to your brain.
What causes waves?
The wind blowing across water causes most waves. The size of a wave depends on the strength of the wind, how long it blows, and the distance over which it travels. Strong winds and great distances create big waves. Waves occur when the wind forces the surface of water up as it tries to pull it along, and gravity pulls it back down again. These push and pull forces cause the up and down movement of waves. The tops of waves are known as crests, and their bottoms are called troughs. Although wavy water looks like it's traveling along, it really doesn't move much, other than up and down. The water droplets that make up that wave travel in a kind of circle, propelled by the energy of the wind, with the top of the circle being the crest of the wave. A seagull floating in the water will move up and down with the swelling of a wave, but it won't move forward toward the shore. When waves reach a shoreline, though, their action is affected by the shallow ocean floor, and they are said to break on the shore. Their water moves forward with some force, up onto a beach or against rocks. Wave crests that break into white foam are called whitecaps.
How many stars are there?
Stars are arranged in galaxies throughout the universe. Galaxies are very large groups held together in disk-like shapes by gravitational forces. Our own galaxy, the Milky Way, has some 100 billion stars. With powerful telescopes, scientists have located billions more galaxies in the universe in addition to the Milky Way. And each of these galaxies probably contains many billions of stars. Many more galaxies may exist that scientists have not yet seen. The number of stars in the universe is almost as unimaginable as the vastness of the universe itself.
What are spores?
Complex types of plants. Conifers and flowering plants reproduce by way of seeds. These seeds began as tiny spores. The spores in the female reproductive parts of the plant produce an egg cell, while the spores in the male reproductive parts produce sperm cells enclosed in a pollen grain. When the pollen grain is carried, by wind or insects, for example, to a plant's female parts, one of the sperm cells joins with the egg cell, and a seed is formed. That seed contains everything necessary, with the help of water, the right soil, and sunlight, to make a new plant, and once seeds are scattered, they can germinate, or grow into a plant. Simpler types of plants like mosses and ferns reproduce by scattering spores rather than seeds. These plants produce spores in sporangia, or spore cases. Once the spores are mature, they are released and scatter, sometimes carried by wind and water until they reach suitable places for new plants to start. Once spores germinate, they produce tiny plants called gametophytes, which look nothing like the parent plants they came from. Gametophytes produce sex cells and then unite with each other to create the next generation. Plants called sporophytes, which do resemble their parents. During the sporophyte stage, the plant produces spores, which eventually fall to the ground, scatter, and begin the process all over again. Spores are in the air all around us, though they are so small that we can only see them with a microscope. But we know they are there because some of them grow into the molds and mildews that show up around the bathtub or on certain foods that are left on the counter for too long.
How do plants cause hay fever?
The male reproductive cells of many plants are encased in a hard grain called pollen. Wind carries the pollen of many trees and grasses from one plant to another. When these male reproductive cells unite with female reproductive cells in plants of the same species, fertilization and seed making takes place. Unlike plants that are pollinated by insects or animals, wind-pollinated plants have to produce huge numbers of pollen grains because wind pollination is a less reliable method of fertilization. During certain parts of the year, the air is filled with such pollen grains, which are fine and dry for easier wind travel. Billions of spores, microscopic reproductive cells produced by other types of plants, like molds, also fill the air. Some people are allergic to all these tiny airborne plant particles. They cause inflammation and extra fluid production in the eyes, nose, and throat, resulting in symptoms like itchy, watery eyes, stuffy noses, coughing, and sneezing. The condition is known as hay fever, though it doesn't usually involve hay or cause a fever. People who have seasonal hay fever get these symptoms in the season of the year when the specific pollen they are allergic to is released. In spring, hay fever may be caused by tree pollens. In summer, grass pollens may be the culprit. Ragweed plants bloom in the late summer and fall, their pollens are the most common cause of hay fever.
What do the stars and stripes on the United States flag mean?
When the first United States flag was adopted in 1777, it had 13 alternating red and white stripes. 7 red, 6 white, and, in the upper left portion, 13 white stars on a blue background. The number 13 was chosen because that was the number of original states that formed the United States. For several years after that design was adopted, a new stripe and a new star were added each time a new state joined the Union. But in 1818 Congress decided to keep the number of stripes at 13 and simply add a new star for each new state. The U.S. flag has several nicknames: the Stars and Stripes, the Star-Spangled Banner, and Old Glory. At the time the U.S. flag was designed, the stars and stripes, and the colors of each, were given no specific meaning. The ideas for the design most likely were based on other countries' flags. In 1782, when the national seal was designed and the flag was incorporated into it, national leaders decided that each color and symbol should have a meaning. As reported in the book Our Flag, published by the U.S. House of Representatives in 1989, it was decided that red symbolized hardiness, strength and valor, bravery. White symbolized purity and innocence, and blue represented vigilance, perseverance, and justice. It has also been said that the stars are symbols of the heavens, and the stripes represent rays of light coming from the sun.
Who decides what is right and wrong?
When you are young, it is mainly your parents, but also teachers and other grown ups close to you, who decide what is right and wrong. They are the ones who make the rules that they believe will keep you safe, and help you learn how to become a good person and get along in the world. Adults make the best teachers because they have experienced a lot of different situations while growing up themselves, and they have learned lessons from those experiences that they can share with you. Grown ups are wiser than children, who have lived just a short time in the world. But, as you continue to mature, you will have your own experiences and learn your own lessons. You may begin to question certain rules, and your ideas about what is right and wrong may change. This development is a normal part of growing up. The point at which you start to become the independent and unique person you are meant to be. Still, no matter how much you change, it is important to remember that some rules of behavior will always remain the same. One rule is to treat yourself with care and respect. Another is to treat others with the same thoughtfulness and respect with which you would like them to treat you. When you grow up, you will have to follow the rules of law and government in the country in which you live. Many of these rules are based on respect for the rights of others.
Why is mercury used in thermometers?
Mercury, the only common metal that has a liquid form at room temperature, doesn't become a solid until it reaches -38 degrees Fahrenheit, -39 degrees Celsius. Most liquids freeze in temperatures like that. Mercury doesn't boil until 611 degrees Fahrenheit, 357 degrees Celsius, and it doesn't stick to glass. So mercury is an ideal material to use in thermometers, which are often needed to record temperatures well below zero and well into the range where most liquids boil. Colored alcohol is sometimes used in thermometers, but because it boils easily, it is not good for recording high temperatures. Like all liquids, mercury expands when it is heated and contracts when it is cooled. In a thermometer, it moves up and down in a closed tube on which a scale is marked, showing the temperature of the air, liquid, or solid that surrounds it. A major disadvantage to mercury is that it is extremely poisonous. Some states in the US have banned the sale of mercury thermometers, and others are expected to follow. Mercury thermometers should be handled with care. If a thermometer breaks and mercury spills out, cleanup should be done by an adult wearing rubber gloves. The mercury beads should be scooped up with a piece of stiff cardboard and placed in a container with a lid. Anything that touched the mercury gloves, cardboard container should be sealed in 2 layers of plastic bags. A local waste disposal agency can advise on how best to dispose of the bag containing the mercury.
What is Earth Day?
During the 1960s, information about problems with the environment, chemicals killing fish in waters, air pollution damaging the atmosphere and endangering the health of all creatures, the widespread destruction of forests and other natural areas began to concern people all over the world. A country's senator named Gaylord Nelson wondered why environmental issues were so disturbing to citizens but didn't seem to be on the government's list of problems to correct.
How do scientists measure the strength of an earthquake?
A few different scales measure how strong an earthquake is. The best known is the Richter scale, created in 1935, which uses an instrument called a seismograph to measure the size of the ground waves created by an earthquake. An earthquake's size, or magnitude, generally ranges from 1 to 8 on the Richter scale. Though the waves of some giant quakes have registered well beyond the top of the scale, the shock waves of an earthquake that registers a magnitude of 1 can only be detected with special instruments. while those with a magnitude of 8 cause massive damage. Every increase of one number means a tenfold increase in the strength of an earthquake, for example. A quake that measures 5 on the scale is 10 times stronger than one that measures 4. Some new methods have been devised to measure earthquakes, including one that measures what is called moment magnitude. This scale examines the size of the fault where the earthquake took place and measures how much Earth's crust has slipped. The Mercalli scale is also used to measure the strength of an earthquake. This scale works by describing the effect an earthquake has on people and structures. It lists 12 levels of intensity an earthquake can reach. At level 1, for example, only a few people may feel a quake. But at level 6, it is felt by all and damage starts to occur to buildings. A level 12 earthquake would bring about large-scale destruction.
Which plant grows the largest fruit?
A plant known as the jackfruit, which grows in the countries of India and Sri Lanka, is thought to produce the largest fruits in the world. One fruit can weigh up to 50 pounds, 22 kilograms. They are oval, yellow, and prickly on the outside and have sweet or sour brown pulpy flesh on the inside. The flesh can be cooked or eaten raw.
What do A, M and PM mean?
The abbreviation A.M. stands for the Latin phrase ante meridiem, which means before noon. PM stands for post meridiem, which means afternoon. Meridian, the English spelling, which used to mean midday, refers to an imaginary line that would appear if you could draw a line from the North Pole to the South Pole. The terms came into use in ancient Rome, when the movements of the sun were used to measure time. At 3 points during the day when the sun rose, when the sun set, and when the sun was directly overhead at midday, it was easy enough for the Romans to determine the time. So they divided the period of daylight into 2 parts: the period of time before midday, AM, and the period of time after, PM.
What makes my knuckles crack?
There are tiny amounts of fluid around your joints, the place where 2 or more bones meet. That keeps them lubricated so they can move easily. When you stretch your fingers quickly, the pressure in the fluid around your finger joints changes, and empty spaces are created. As fluid rushes back to fill the spots, it produces the cracking noises you hear. Other joints, knees, ankles, neck may crack sometimes when you change their positions, too.
How does a vulture find its food?
Most vultures dine on such appealing items as garbage and carrion, or the flesh of dead animals. They soar high above the ground on their large, wide wings for hours at a time, searching for a food source. Scientists aren't sure how they know where the carrion is, but they suspect it may be a combination of sight and smell. Turkey vultures, common in North America, have a well-developed sense of smell. Though scientists aren't sure how they could smell their food from such lofty heights. It's more likely that they rely on their vision to spot animal carcasses, or to find other scavengers that have already located a feeding site. While the idea of an animal eating garbage and carrion may be disgusting, it is actually a very beneficial practice. Vultures and other scavengers perform a valuable service, cleaning up carcasses that would otherwise take a long time to decompose.
What is addiction?
In many cases, substance abuse leads to addiction, which means the person taking the drug is dependent on it to feel pleasure or to not get sick. There are two different types of addiction. One type is called psychological addiction, which means the person taking the drug gets hooked on the pleasurable feelings associated with that drug. A physical addiction, on the other hand, means that the person has built up a tolerance to the effects of the drug, requiring more of the drug more often to achieve the same high. Eventually the addicted person must take massive quantities of certain drugs to feel anything from it at all. And those quantities can sometimes reach deadly proportions. If an addicted person stops taking the drug, he or she will go through what is called withdrawal. That means the body has adjusted so much to having the drug in the system that the person feels sick without it. Withdrawal symptoms include fever, restlessness, vomiting, diarrhea, and severe dehydration. Some drugs are more addictive, or habit-forming, than others. Cigarettes, for example, contain nicotine, which is a highly addictive drug. Many cigarette smokers have a desire to quit but have a very difficult time doing so.
What is the most widely read book in the world?
The world's best-selling book is the Bible. During the past 2 centuries alone, it has sold an estimated 3.88 billion copies. The Bible, made up primarily of the Old Testament and the New Testament, is the holy book of Christianity, the most widely practiced religion in the world today. The Old Testament, which covers events before the birth of Jesus Christ, constitutes the Jewish Bible.
Why do I have to wash my hands after I blow my nose?
Even when you use a tissue to blow your nose, You may get some of the impurities from inside your nose on your hands. You can keep from spreading germs to others or to surfaces that other people will touch by washing your hands well. That doesn't mean running the tips of your fingers under cold water. A good hand washing takes 2 minutes in warm, soapy water.
Why do I sometimes get a headache when I eat ice cream?
You may have heard people call it a brain freeze, or an ice cream headache. You're gulping down some ice cream or a slush on a hot summer day, and all of a sudden you have a pain in your head that feels like you ran into a wall forehead first.
How are seeds made?
Conifers, plants that bear cones, and flowering plants all make seeds. Plants that produce flowers, called angiosperms, cover 90% of Earth's land surface. Most of the plants we know, like broadleaf trees, vines, grass, and more, are flowering plants. Although sometimes their flowers are so small and colorless that we barely notice them. While flowering plants now dominate the world, that was not always the case. They are relatively new to Earth, appearing just 135 million years ago. In ages before then, simpler plants dominated. The Great Age of Conifers, which bear seeds in cones, began 300 million years ago. Coniferous trees, which are part of the plant group Gymnosperms, like pines, spruces, firs, and cypresses, bear male and female cones. Male cones contain sacs that release millions of tiny grains of pollen, male reproductive cells, into the air. They are carried by the wind to female cones that have reproductive cells located in ovules, which are sticky and attract pollen grains. When male and female cells meet, fertilization occurs, and seeds form in the scales of a female cone, which increases in size as the seeds grow. Once the seeds are mature, which takes a couple of years, the cone opens to release them, equipped with a wing to help it to travel in the wind. Each seed has a tough outer coating and some food inside to use if it finds a good spot to start growing. Seed making in flowering plants is a little more complicated. Most flowers contain both male and female sex cells. The typical flower has 4 main parts: an outer cup of leaf-like sepals, a ring of petals within the sepals, and inside, male reproductive organs surrounding female parts. Male cells develop in structures called stamens and travel enclosed in the hard shell of pollen grains. Female cells, or ovules, develop deep in a flower's ovary, enclosed in a structure called a pistil. The top of the pistil, known as the stigma, is long and sticky and a good target for pollen. After it reaches the stigma, a small tube grows out of the pollen grain. The male cells travel down the pollen tube, eventually reaching female ovules. Then fertilization occurs and seeds start to grow. Since flowers possess both male and female parts, some flowers can fertilize themselves, or fertilize another flower on the same plant, which is called self-pollination. Or the ovules of one flower may be fertilized by the pollen of a different flowering plant of the same species, a method called cross-pollination. The wind, water, insects, and other animals help to carry pollen from one flower to another. Cross-pollination usually produces a better plant. The offspring of cross-pollination possesses the genetic traits of two parents, which may give it new characteristics that will help it survive in an always changing environment. Cross-pollination is so desirable, in fact, that many flowering plants have developed different ways to keep self-pollination from happening. In the flowers of a spiderwort plant, for example, the stamens are ready to release pollen grains before the pistils are ready to accept them. So the pollen has to travel to other spiderwort plants in search of a ripe pistil.
Why are hurricanes given names?
Tropical storms, including hurricanes, that have wind speeds of at least 39 miles. 63 kilometers per hour are given human names to identify them. This way, meteorologists, or weather scientists, can keep track of several tropical storms at once without confusion. Monitoring tropical storms is important for the safety of ships that sail in tropical waters, and for people who live along tropical ocean coasts who need to be warned of approaching danger. The practice of naming hurricanes and tropical storms began in the 1950s. For a long time until 1979 only women's names were used. The World Meteorological Organization decides which names will be on the list, creating lists for 6 years at a time. The names begin with all the letters of the alphabet, with the exception of Q, U, X, Y, and Z, because few names begin with these letters. Hurricanes and tropical storms are given names from the list in alphabetical order as they appear. And a name may be reused once 6 years have passed. But if a storm has caused very great damage, its name will be retired, which means it cannot be reused for at least 10 years.
Are spiders insects?
Many people think of spiders as insects, but actually they are classified in a separate category. Spiders are part of a group called arachnids, which also includes mites, ticks, and scorpions. Arachnids share many features with their arthropod cousins, but they differ in that they do not have antennae. Also, spiders have 8 legs, insects have 6. And their bodies are segmented into 2 parts, insects' bodies have 3 parts.
How do airplanes fly?
A large jet plane complete with hundreds of passengers weighs several 100,000 pounds.
How are clothes made from a sheep's coat?
Wild sheep were tamed or domesticated about 7,000 years ago. But for a long time they were raised mostly for the milk that the females, called ewes, produced, for their meat, and for their skins. It was not until much later that people figured out how to use the long, curly hair, or fleece, of some sheep to make thread and weave it into cloth. Early on, men and women learned that they did not need to kill sheep to use their woolly coats. If they sheared, or removed, the fleece once a year, it would grow back time and again. Today, some breeds of sheep are raised for their meat, while others with long, soft hair are raised for their fleece. In about a minute, a shearer can remove the entire coat of a sheep with electric clippers. The fleece from a single sheep can weigh up to 20 pounds, or about 9 kilograms. After the fleece is removed, it is cleaned and combed so that all of its fibers are arranged in the same direction. Next, the fibers are overlapped and twisted together into long threads that can be woven in a crisscross pattern on a loom to make fabric. The woolen cloth is then cut into pieces and sewn together to make clothes.